A man in pajamas and a borrowed coat walks into a cafe. He rants to the waitress about how his Ruby is going to build a better world.
It makes dreams come true.
I bet it does.
The waitress goes about her day. She tries to make small talk to the surly coworker she has a crush on. She tells a nervous young man that he is sure to ace his upcoming job interview. She beams over the arrival of two married regulars who met thanks to her matchmaking, and smiles through the obvious tension between them. Nothing bad happens for about 13 minutes of this episode, but a hard-to-place dread settles into the cheerful rhythm of this beginning almost immediately. This partially has to do with John ominously holding up his ruby at the beginning and saying,
This is my secret.
The waitress lies and pretends she knows what he's talking about. The nice nothingness of these conversations are tense. A tension broken up only by Judy's concerns about her girlfriend, which I would have preferred learning about gradually as we do everyone else's secrets. Judy in general is someone who seems to say whatever she wants from the beginning, which I find odd, but there's something so chillingly sad about how expertly this show emphasizes the moments where people repress what they actually want to say in favor of something less vulnerable, less confrontational, less real. The ordinariness of these little sacrifices evokes the dozens of similar conversations we all have with each other every day. Before John makes his first move, this episode makes us feel his anxiety about this status quo. Why are we like this? And then, John D's ruby starts to glow. Welcome to Acolytes of Horror, where we examine the horrors of life through the horrors of film. My name is Nathan, and tonight I'm scared of Netflix's The Sandman, specifically the episode titled 24/7. I love the way this episode finds horror in small talk. I don't know about you, but I have a lot of trouble with small talk sometimes. It can feel like an audition that I am failing somehow. You know, like someone will say, "How are you doing?" And I'll think, this person doesn't really care how I'm doing, so I'll just say, "I'm fine. How are you?" And truthfully, I don't care how they're doing either, because we're standing in an elevator that's about to disperse us into two separate floors in like 30 seconds. And besides, I only see this person like every couple of months because he's a friend of a friend, and he knows that, so he just says, "I'm fine." And then I'll feel like this failure, kinda like I should have said a joke or made a more specific observation, anything to make myself more interesting. But you know, at the end of the day, I'd rather be forgettable than embarrassing, so we just tread water, saying nothing but niceties to keep at bay that bigger nothing, the sphincter clenching horror that is the awkward silence. I really like this episode, though. I like the changes that it makes to the source material. The events of the cafe in the comics are a lot more nihilistic. The story is about a loss of agency, the horror of a madman reaching his greasy fingers into these people's minds and forcing them to feel whatever he wants them to feel. John's mind and body have been warped to the point where he is kind of just a creature. They worship him, they sing, they make love, they become beasts, they kill. He refers to them as flies. He does it because he can. It's a great horror story in its own right. The John D of the comics looks forward to bringing about the end of the world, but this John wants to make a better world, a more honest one. Comic book John D wants to be a king. He puts himself in the center of a lot of the mayhem, but this John sits on the sidelines. There are long spells where you almost forget he's there. Maybe the best sequence of the whole show is when he casually walks through the restaurant to get a gallon of ice cream, uninvolved and barely interested in the restaurant full of people having desperate sex with mismatched partners. In the show, John uses the ruby to force everyone to be truly honest with each other all the time. When he does intervene, it's usually to ask questions, digging for more truth. The resulting carnage plays out a lot of similar beats from the comics. Secrets are revealed, lust is indulged, and at the end they all die in a flurry of violence. But the chaos comes from impulses that have been simmering in these characters from the beginning. The way the episode slowly reveals what is happening and how bad it's going to get is so masterful. It's by far the best paced show in the season. For once, the episode isn't constantly cutting away from what we actually care about to watch the Corinthian promise to do something important one day, eventually.
He will come after you.
Well, then if he does, he won't be coming back either. She asked Rose to call me.
Will I see you again?
You should hope not.
So the tension can just build. The pacing admittedly does run on vibes more than the psychology of the characters at times, especially at the end when everyone is suddenly killing themselves because it's almost time for the episode to be over, I guess. So great! Another Acolytes of Horror video where I say a bunch of nice things about a cool horror thing, and that is it. Yeah, doesn't that feel good? Yeah, so check out my Patreon if you want to support the channel. Okay. I don't like the show. All right, it has its moments. Every episode, actually, it has at least some inspired things. There's a lot of great performances, but I don't think this thing understands that the Sandman is a horror fantasy. Look at the abstract cover art of the comics. How do they make you feel? Now let's look at the abstractions of the show's end credits. It's colorful and fun. Any hints of horror are more thrilling than ominous, which I think is representative of a larger creative strategy to downplay the horror in favor of a more exciting adventure-type show. I'm not sure if there's necessarily more death in the comics, but there's certainly a lot more pain and fear. The more disturbing source material is either cut entirely or they sweeten it somehow, like how Rachel in the show is given a more dignified send-off where she gets to say goodbye to Constantine, while in the comics she has totally lost her mind, and we even get a whole page from her perspective where she's fiending for more dream dust. Nada in the comics is in agony, while in the show she's just kind of sad. Comic book John Dee shoots the woman who gives him a ride, and in the show he gives her a protection amulet. Or instead of the rogue nightmares convincing a dead man that he's the Sandman for their own selfish pursuit of power, the nightmare is a nice lady who is helping an abused boy because she wants to be a nice Dream, which Dream gets huffy about even though he had no problems with this before.
Gregory began as a nightmare.
He's one of us now.
You have served this kingdom with great honor.
I merely wish to be a dream and not a nightmare.
The choice is not yours to make.
But don't worry, at the end he says he's sorry and gives her fairy wings.
I had no right returning here after over a century expecting everything to be just as I'd left it. But now I'm listening. More. Trying to.
This is actually Dream's last scene in the whole season. The culmination of a ham-fisted attempt to impose a Joseph Campbell-style character arc onto Dream. Everyone is constantly talking about how Dream needs to change.
Keep me informed.
I do not need a minder.
You can't change it.
That's why Lucian sent me to help you. This is why you need a raven.
Go back to the dreaming, Matthew. You are going to the dreaming.
Or, hear me out, and I believe Dream of the Endless would never leave his raven here alone.
Do you think these little games of ours will change him? We all change, sir. Even you, perhaps. One day.
It's played up to the extent that it kind of creates the illusion that this is a hero's journey type story where all of the conflict exists to teach Dream a lesson about friendship and the value of human life. If you're new to the comics, the Sandman is about this dude named Dream who is in charge of all of our dreams, and he's been ruling the dream world since the beginning of time. And yeah, he does have these character flaws where he tries to do everything by himself and he can be cruel when he feels insulted, but everything in the story doesn't revolve around trying to fix this. The world of the Sandman is much more crowded and complicated than just Dream. He's barely even in a lot of it. These stories are not about heroes learning lessons so much as they're about the importance of stories and how we needs stories to make sense of a world without heroes. And with that definition in mind, maybe you can already see how important the horror elements of these stories are in driving that point home. The dream world, Earth, and all the other realms are places where anything can and does happen without regard to morality or doctrine. The world of the Sandman is governed not by right or wrong, but by this slippery and impossible effort to maintain some vague sense of balance. A lot of the drama lies in the Dream Lord's confusion as to what that balance should or even could be. Nobody really knows how or why everything works the way that it does. Nobody's life is building to some grand catharsis full of meaning. He and his family are endless, after all. If anything, spoilers for the end of the Sandman, here it comes. Uh-oh, better skip it. Here it comes. All right, if anything, Dream dies at the end because he doesn't change. His last conversation is with his sister, who expresses frustration at how he has recklessly pursued his own self-destruction all on his own. To which he says, "If you say so." Those are literally his last words. All of creation is just kind of swirling in this soup of cosmic power and contradiction. As colorful as the art is, darkness is never far away. The panels are packed with grotesque life, much of it malevolent. The almost claustrophobic density of the early comics is swapped out in the show for a spaciousness that I think they want to feel epic, but all too often just feels empty. A lot of the scenes are shot in these one-shots that often have a lot of negative space around the actors because the aspect ratio is so wide. It's hard for things to feel threatening with a visual language like this, and worse, it cuts the actors off from their environments, limits their body language, and makes it hard to get into a rhythm with a scene partner who may not even be standing behind the camera. There's plenty of weirdos, but no freaks. So many of the characters are a lot sexier than their original designs. John Dee, Despair, Alex Burgess, Cain and Abel, Brute and Glob. Even the serial killer convention looks warm and inviting. There just isn't a whole lot of ugliness. The Sandman is, in a very direct way, about the depths of the human subconsciousness. Dreams are where our fears and repression take shape and run wild. And most issues of the Sandman are fantasy stories with horror stuff in them, but 24/7 is based on an issue that is a horror story through and through, and as such the episode is forced to portray those fears. And in an increasingly homogenized TV and movie landscape where it feels like every big budget blockbuster has the emotional range of a mediocre sitcom, this episode stands as a testament to the importance of horror. Horror demands blood and pain. It confronts us with the parts of the human experience that we'd rather pretend just didn't exist. It wants to surprise and provoke more than it wants to appease. In a way, horror tells the truth. That's what this episode does. That's what the comics do. But all too often, the show settles for telling us what it thinks we want to hear. I'm fine. How are you?